Live Network. This is OpenLine.
Hello everyone, welcome to OpenLine. Very interesting topic tonight. We're also streaming this live on our Facebook page, so I'll be reading comments throughout the night. More than half the people arrested in Davidson County for misdemeanors are unable to make bail. They can't afford it. That means they stay in jail until their trial. Sometimes that can be months. Now, other cities don't do it this way. Happy to talk with Hedy Weinberg, who says this is unconstitutional. Hedy Weinberg from the ACLU, thank you for being here.
Good to be here.
So, how big a problem is this?
Well, this is a nationwide problem, and it's not peculiar to Nashville or any other cities. Because we know that when individuals are eligible for bail, and not everyone is, but when they are, they're not a flight risk, they're not dangerous, they then are given bond. And we know then that's where we see the two-tier system. If you have money, if you have wealth, you're able to post your bond and get out. If you don't, and we know that's typically a number of people in our system because that's who the system targets and that's who falls into that maze, those folks are not able to. So when you recognize that in Nashville, we're talking about Nashville, the average bail is $5,000 for misdemeanor arrestees. These are not
we're not talking about murder, we're not talking about felonies, we're talking about misdemeanors.
We're not talking about people arrested for felonies, we're talking about misdemeanors. So that means that $5,000 is what they need to have either to provide the cash to the jail, but more importantly to deal with the for-profit bond company. They need to put up a percentage, usually about 10% of that $5,000. That's impossible for most people who have been arrested. And so in Nashville, about 60% of those misdemeanor arrestees actually stay in jail for the duration of their case. And we're talking about people who are presumed innocence, right? We know that you have the right to a trial, and until that trial takes place or a settlement takes place, you are presumed innocent. And so that means people are sitting in jail because, not because they're a danger to the community or to themselves, not because they're a flight risk, but because they're too poor to put.
The purpose of bond money or bail money is, as I understand it, they're supposed to put up some money, and then if they don't show up, then they lose that money.
Right, exactly.
And so if we did away with it, then what's to ensure us that they will show up?
Great question, because the reality is research shows that requiring people to put up cash is not any more effective than having non-financial agreements, right? And so what we have found, and you could look at certain cities across the country, is that in some instances the court texts messages. Your court date is next Tuesday. Your court date is in 3 days. Your court date is tomorrow. Be there at 2 p.m. this afternoon. That's as effective, we have learned. The other important issue to recognize is that in order to have the court, you know, when you come up in front of a magistrate, who typically is who hears your case, not hears your case, but who you first see when you're arrested, and it becomes apparent, according, you know, the magistrate says, yes, you're eligible, there's typically no question, no questioning about whether or not you can even afford to pay the bail that's being posted. So the due process, the questions that need to be asked are not being asked. And that's one of the things that we feel is very important in this city. And again, in other cities across the state, and we know is a problem across the country, that you have to at least provide that due process. You have to at least ask the individual, you know, if they are able to post that amount or recognize what their financial abilities are. So in this, when we're talking about bail reform, money bail reform, it requires two things. One, to at least ask the question, if you're eligible, can you put that money up so that the individual isn't kept there just because they're too poor? And then two, really look at why should you keep people in jail pre-trial if they're not dangerous? And we all know that there are collateral consequences, devastating consequences for people who sit in jail pre-trial. They lose contact with their family, they you know, lose their job.
Certainly, yeah, they lose their job.
They miss school. They don't have the ability to work with their attorney or even talk to potential witnesses or keep the contact with the community, which is so important. So we already, and they come in front of the court in their orange suit, right? They're not really treated in the same way we would expect to be treated if you or I went into court.
And we have to emphasize here, what you're talking about is misdemeanors. You are not talking about when someone is arrested for murder that there should not be a bond or a bail. That's not what you're talking about here. You're talking about somebody for shoplifting or a misdemeanor case.
Well, we're talking about that, but I think it's important to recognize the court looks carefully at who should be eligible for bail. So if you are eligible for bail, your financial status, your ability to pay bail should not be what keeps you in jail.
And I've been to many court hearings in Nashville, and you see these people that have come through, they have been in jail for weeks, sometimes months, waiting for their trial because they can't afford to pay the bond money. You see that. Now, I was surprised that there were other cities where that's not the case. I mean, Washington, D.C., it's on 1.5% apparently. Here, it's 60%, more than half. And so there are cities that don't do it the way we do it.
Right. Now, when we're talking about the 60%, we're talking about individuals who are staying in jail pre-trial because they can't afford bond or bail. When we talk about the 1.5% in D.C. or the 3% in New York, New York City, we're talking about folks who are staying in jail for the duration of their case. So yes, you have to look and say, okay, what's happening here? Now in D.C., they don't have, you don't stay in jail if you're eligible for bail to be released, you get out. You don't have to use money. It's a non-secured bail, right? Kentucky doesn't work with the for-profit bond industry. They have their own system in Kentucky where the bond is paid, but it's paid to the courts, to the city. So what you also have to recognize is there's a whole industry, a for-profit bond system.
That's very politically active.
Very politically active. They're at the legislature and their courts. This is nationwide. ACLU has done a really exciting, important report on, you know, just who are these companies? What do they enjoy by keeping people either locked up because they can't afford bail or recognizing that they're providing some bail, but at the same time the indigent person typically is paying a whole lot of money to be released.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Obviously, there is a vested interest on the part of a lot of folks not to change this.
Exactly.
So here you are up there saying, let's change this. How is that being met?
Well, we're not moving in that direction right now at the state legislature. There's some wonderful organizations, and I think that's what's so exciting right now about criminal justice work. There is a broad spectrum of organizations from both sides of the aisle, liberal, conservative, who are working together. ACLU is working with Beacon, with Right on Crime, to look at how to reduce mass incarceration, how to ensure that our streets are safer, that anyone who has contact with the criminal justice system, be offender, alleged offender, convicted individual, and as important, victim, that those individuals are treated with, you know, equally in a just way, and then also to ensure that we're not wasting taxpayer dollars. And that's what's really happening. The criminal justice system, some like to say it's broken. I'm not ever sure that it was created in a way to think about how to ensure that people, yes, they're punished, they serve their time, but when they get out, they don't enter that revolving door, because we know that folks who are in the criminal justice system, and it starts very early. You know, the front, the drivers are school to prison pipeline. You know, the policies and practices where individuals are pushed through the pathway, because when they're in kindergarten, and typically it's the minority male 5, 6 years old who's acting out in kindergarten class because he's not used to sitting in a chair, perhaps. And you know, he's reprimanded, he's sent to the back of the classroom, he's sent to the hallway, to the principal's office, and eventually suspended, expelled. And I'm going very fast through these steps. But so by the time he's in high school, there's a good chance that he's not only touched the juvenile justice system, but there is a record that, you know, it's going to be very hard for him to get out of that maze. And we don't provide the resources, the wraparound community services that are so important to so many of us. And
you touched on this, but for those who are concerned about the taxes here, there's an argument. Because what you're talking about, 60% of misdemeanor arrestees are in jail here in Davidson County. So that's a lot of people in jail for a misdemeanor, nonviolent crime, who haven't even been convicted, who the taxpayers are supplementing.
Exactly. I mean, it cost us about $25,000, I think, to keep someone in prison a year. We spend about $9,500 to $10,000 on a student, their education, a year. So recognize what could we enjoy as a community, as a society, if we focus more resources on educating our kids and not locking people up who in some instances have issues where jail is not the right place to put them, or prison. They have mental health issues, they have substance abuse issues. So one of the conversations taking place, and it's exciting because law enforcement is very much a part of this conversation, is rather than when you arrest, before you arrest someone, when you see that there's a problem on the street, recognize that maybe there should be a pre-booking program, a diversion program, where they are sent to a substance abuse program or a mental health program. And there's some very exciting programs. New Mexico, Washington State, New York have these programs. They're called pre-booking programs.
So we have several calls. We're going to start taking your calls here in a moment. I'm interested, you said that there's no data that indicates that if a person is told just to come back to court on a certain date, that they're any more likely to come back to court if they have a bail amount set or if they don't. And so that would be the only thing I would think that would be a question here.
No, I said actually they're
just as likely to come back, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, so they're just as likely to come back, because the reason, as I understand it, it's always been we set this amount of money over their heads so that they will come back, and that's the whole reason for this this system. But you're saying there's no evidence that that's getting people to come back any more than in places where they don't put this money over their head.
Right, and we know, and there's some very creative programs and pilot projects, and I think we're going to start one here, I'm told, where, you know, just texting the individual to return, to remind them.
And if they don't, then they've got another charge against them.
Yeah, well, they have a big issue if they don't show up in court, exactly. But that most people, when reminded, show up. Once you are identified as eligible for bail, then the court should recognize that you shouldn't keep someone locked up just because they don't have the dollars, the money to pay.
All right, we're going to take a break. Wayne, William, others, hold on the line. If you want to call in, there's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. I think we're also streaming this on Facebook, so if you want to make a comment, I'll read some of those comments coming up. We'll be back right after this.